want to share a very fascinating, fun read that I just enjoyed. The Demon of Unrest by best-selling author Erik Larson. Really fun read. Very, very interesting slice of American history. Reams have been written about the Civil War, of course, but very little is understood about the lead up to the Civil War. Obviously, the North and the Southern states were fighting essentially about the existence of slavery not only as a way of life, but as the economic bedrock of the entire Southern states, but also as a moral philosophy. I mean, that was really the crux of the entire issue and what led to the Civil War and the reshaping of the entire country after that. But what's fascinating about this particular book, and is it hones in very, very severely on one specific flashpoint, and really this specific flashpoint led to the entire war breaking out. And that was the siege and bombardment of Fort Sumter right off the coast of Charlottesville, North Carolina, which was federal land, a federal fort occupied by Union soldiers, and it became kind of the symbol of over-aggressive Northern interference in their southern lands. And the book basically details in painstaking detail the steps taken by the heroic commander of the fort and the citizens of the city and the nearby surrounding forts that were all taken over by Confederate troops, and this terrible game of chicken that played out over many, many months throughout Lincoln's election and up until his inauguration. And because everyone realized that the first move made would really ignite the whole thing. So there was this very tense standstill and incredible patience. But two things struck out at me about the book, and they literally tie into this week's Torah portion, which really struck me. Number one is that President James Buchanan, who was the predecessor of Abraham Lincoln, he could have solved this problem very, very easily throughout his administration. But in the last 6 months to the year that he was president, he was a total lame duck, and he essentially did everything possible to pass the buck onto Lincoln. I mean, the book is very clear and history is very clear, but it wasn't something I was aware of. He could have solved it, and he could have negotiated it, and he could have sort of made some sort of peace. It's unknown if it would have worked, but he could have made greater efforts to avoid what ended up being a catastrophic civil war. Over 700,000 Americans killed, the most ever still in history. But he didn't. He passed the buck. And he could have done one thing unpopular, but he didn't want to risk popularity with the North, and he wanted to risk his popularity with the South, of which he had many admirers. And so he just figured the best way to appease everyone and to secure a place of legacy in history without saying that he started a war or finished the war or did anything with the war was to remain Switzerland, remain neutral and pass it on to the next guy, which is exactly what he did. And the second thing that's amazing is that not one single person was killed in the eventual bombardment of Fort Sumter. Not a single person was killed, both in the shelling of Sumter and the response from Fort Sumter to the nearby forts and to the city of Charlottesville in their response. Not one single person was killed. In the end, there was a very peaceful surrender, almost a gentlemanly surrender, which was in tune with the gentlemanly conduct of the southern states. They viewed themselves as chivalrous, even amongst war. And not one single person was killed or harmed. Very minor bruises. And yet, from that conflagration, from that fight, with no casualties, came the greatest single deadliest event in American history, the Civil War, with over 700,000 dead. And especially the first point really struck me, because if one person has the ability to not pass the buck and to do something unpopular, it could change the course of history. And that's exactly what happened to Pinchas in this week's Torah portion. Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, does something that could be viewed as incredibly unpopular. He kills two people who were in the middle of an immoral act, and he risked his life to do this. Yet he did it only on behalf of the entire Jewish people. So the contrast just struck with me. Here we have a President Buchanan, who does something only for his own self-glorification, for his place in history, but he risks eventually hundreds of thousands of lives of the American people, which of course he didn't foresee. But that's what ended up happening. And people warned him that he should step in before it gets worse. And here we have in our Torah, thank God, to make a great separation, someone who really risked his life and his entire legacy because he was doing something that he knew innately was right. And this whole concept of zealotry and doing something because you feel that it's right has been totally blown to smithereens and out of proportion by people who think that they're self-righteous and think that they know what they're doing. But it has to be coming from someone who's totally and completely connected to God and who acts completely out of love for the Jewish people, not for any self-interest whatsoever. And this is exactly the secret of Pinchas, which is why exactly his reward was that he was given almost eternal life. He became Elijah the prophet, and he's the one who comes to every circumcision, and our Passover Seder, our traditions tell us, because he's the one, although by killing, he ensured life and legacy for the Jewish people. Why? All because of this amazing attribute. He did it completely for the interest of the Jewish people, and there was not 1 ounce of self-interest in his beautiful action. So let's all try to be like Pinchas, and if you want a fun, interesting read, there it is, The Demon of Unrest. God willing, we should know the difference between self-righteousness, acting out of self-interest, and try to always focus on the betterment of the entire Jewish people, because when you act out of that cause, you're guaranteed success. Have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.